Hello and welcome to the Bird's Nest. I'm your host, Shedrick Byrd, also known as the Mississippi Byrd. As I promised, today I'm going to talk about how racism and discrimination in the Navy enhanced me to become a very successful, having a very successful career. I have here today my daughter with me. She wanted to sit in with me. I've told her many stories about my growing up in the Jim Crow era, and I also mentioned that I was going to do a podcast today about my time discrimination in the Navy. And she said, well, can I sit in with your daddy? I said, yeah, come on, sit in. So she's going to sit in with me and ask me questions about that discrimination event that I'm going to talk about. Well, first of all, I'd like to say that I joined the Navy in 1959. I retired in 1978, and I had a successful Navy career. I went from E1 Seaman Recruit to E7 Chief Petty Officer during my tour in the Navy. And I also, I should say that I got stationed here in Norfolk, Virginia in 1962. And except for 3 years, all of my career was done here in Norfolk. And I spent 3 years in Sasebo, Japan on board the USS Byrd, or the Galveston ship, and then returned. I got orders to Anti-Submarine Warfare Force.
Okay, just a moment. For those who don't know what a degauser ship is, what exactly is a degauser ship, and what does it do? What's its function?
Well, the Galveston ship is a converted minesweeper. For those who know what a minesweeper is, it's a small ship. It's about maybe 220 some feet long, and it's been converted to carry an electronic pipe on board that's supported by about 5 two-leg stands attached to it, and that's what we use to degauss ship.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So you want to know how?
Yeah. So how does it actually work? What is
What we do is if we are tied up to a pier, and a ship is coming across the Pacific, for instance, we would unmoor from the pier, and we would maneuver out into the deep water, some deep enough for a ship to run across the range, and we would lay the range in the water. And then we would go back, pull the ship back to the pier, and we would calibrate the ship that crosses the range to make sure it didn't have too much magnetic field on it. And if it had too much magnetic field, then we would pull the ship in and degauss it. We would wrap a cable around it and degauss it to overnight to electronically vibrate all of the magnetic field off of it, and then the next day we would send it on its way. But if it crossed the range and didn't have a magnetic field, we would just send it on the way anyhow. But anyhow, after I left the USS Byrd, I had orders to Anti-Submarine Warfare Force in Norfolk, and that's where I've been discriminated against a lot while in the Navy, of course, the whole time. But this time, I want to tell about how this particular time I was discriminated against, racially discriminated against, and I had success the rest of my career because I was able to gain the skills and the knowledge for my career enhancement. So I checked into Anti-Submarine Warfare Force as the staff leading yeoman. And during those days, staff duty was creme la de creme. And I had never seen a black person in charge of the staff, in any of the Navy staffs. I worked on the staff before I went to Japan, but I was the mail clerk in the mail room, you know, so I'd never seen a black supervisor. But I checked in as the supervisor for anti-submarine warfare force. Well, when I checked in with the lieutenant admin officer, and when he got my orders, he looked at my orders and he looked at me, and he said, "What's your name?" I said, "Shedrick Byrd." He said, "Byrd, you sure these your orders?" I said, "Yes, sir." And while he was looking at my orders, I said, "Well, can I go around and meet the staff?" And he said, "Yeah, go ahead, meet the staff. You can go and meet the staff." So I started going around to meet the staff and telling everybody that I was their new boss, I was their new supervisor. And so we didn't have computers in those days. And so I went to what they called the typing pool. The typing pool was a room that had about 10 typewriters in it. And when I walked in, there was about 10 white women in there typing. And so I peeped in there and I told them that, I introduced myself and told them that I was the new supervisor for the staff. Well, 2 of the women ran out crying, but I didn't know why they ran out crying at the time. I didn't even think about it really. So the next day when I reported, the lieutenant called me into his office and he said, Byrd, you know why those 2 women ran out of the office crying yesterday? I said, "No, sir, I didn't." He said, "They didn't want to work for you. They didn't want to work for a black man, so they ran out of there crying." So I said, "Oh?" He said, "Yeah." I said, "But I'll take care of it." In my thoughts, I thought maybe he was going to do something, you know, to take care of them.
Right.
But the next day when I reported, he said, "Oh, well, Byrd, we changed your orders. We're gonna send you down to the analysis division." I said, "The analysis division?" I said, "What's that?" He said, "That's computer programming down on the first floor." He said, "I think you'll like it down there. You can learn all about computers and programming and so forth and so on." And of course, I was not interested in no computers or programs at the time. But I went on. This was during the Jim Crow era, and I didn't have any choice but to go on down there. I didn't have anybody to protest to.
So they basically just would rather pacify the women rather than introducing them to necessary change. It was easier, I guess.
Yeah, well, he wasn't about to challenge the women.
Absolutely.
So
yes.
Anyhow, I went on down to the analysis division, and I was supervising one person, the secretary. Excuse me. And the secretary had been there for years, so she knew everything that was going on in the office, and I didn't know nothing. So every day it got so I'd go to the EM club and have lunch. And at lunch or after lunch, I would hang around the EM club and drink beer and shoot pool and maybe drink liquor until about 3 o'clock, and then I'd go back to work and to check out. And I'd check out and go to the barracks. And then I said, you know, this if I keep this up, I'll be an alcoholic. So I decided, hey, you know, I'm going to try to find me a job. So I got a copy of the Virginian Pilot newspaper, and I started scanning the want ads to see if there were any jobs available that I could apply for. And I noticed that they had a couple of jobs in there for perforator operators. Well, after thinking about it for a few minutes, I said, well, a perforator operator, that's something I can do.
Well, what exactly is a perforator?
A perforator operator is one of these big old machines that cut the keys to print the letters for the newspaper. And so it cuts the letters. You know, you sit up there and type that big machine and cut the letters and get your news in. They take ink them down and put them, you know, print the news. So when I applied for that job, I was told that they couldn't give me that job because it was a full-time job. And the plant, the newspaper, didn't hire full-time people who had full-time jobs into a full-time job in the newspaper. So that was out for me, so I couldn't do anything. But then the supervisor came out in the office there, and she said, well, what are you interested in? I told her, I said, well, I'm looking for something administrative. And she said, well, we don't have anything right now part-time that's administrative. So I said, well, okay. She said, but let me tell you, said, there will be a job coming open in the wire room next month. We have a sealer there that's working part-time in the wire room who will be transferred, and his job will come open if you're interested in that. I said, well, tell me what that is. She said, well, it's the wire room where you receive the paper, the copies of the paper information about the newspapers from all over the country. And she said, you have to do some teletyping, because when the editors send their news down to the wire room, they want you to teletype it to send it out to the district, to UPI and AP and so forth and so on. She said, do you know anything about teletyping? Well, I told a lie. I said, yes. And she said, well, I'm thinking to myself, I said, well, if I can type, I should be able to teletype.
Where did you learn how to type that?
Oh, in high school.
Really?
Yeah, I flunked. But anyhow, that's where I learned how to type. But I told her yes. She said, well, how much experience you got? I looked in the air, rubbed my chin, and said, oh, maybe about a year's worth overall. She said, well, would you be interested in coming back and having an interview with the managing editor? I said, yes, ma'am. She said, well, can you come tomorrow night? I said, yes, ma'am. She said, well, okay, I'm going to set you up an interview with the managing editor. So the next night I met with the managing editor, and he asked me about, he said, can you teletype? I said, well, I'm not that good, but yes, sir, because I had gone back after I had told that lie and gone back to the Anti-Submarine Warfare Force on the Sinclair and Fleet compound, and went over to the Operation Communication Center, where one of my buddies, chief radioman, was in charge of communications over at the OpCon Center. And I ran up to him. I had a top secret clearance at the time, so there was no problem getting in there. I told him, I said, man, look, I told a lie, and I told him what had happened. And he said, oh, man, piece of cake. He said, come on in. I'll show you how to operate these teletype machines. He said, and he showed me about the machine. He said, all you got to do is remember letters and keys. He said, when you get ready to type letters, you hit this button, and when you get ready to type keys, you hit this other button. I said, oh, yeah, that is a piece of cake. So he said, you want to practice for a while? I said, yeah, I practiced for about an hour or so. I said, hey, man, I got it. So when I met with the managing editor, I told him that, yeah, I knew how to teletype, but I wasn't that good. He said, well, okay, well, I said, but I can learn. He said, okay. So he took me down to the wire room, and I was amazed. It was about 15 or 16 teletyping machines just going through the news, just coming over these machines.
Oh, wow.
And then I'm looking at that, and when I looked at the teletype, it was a ticker tape machine. It wasn't like that new teletype that the Navy that I had been practicing on. So I got a little nervous, but
What's a ticker tape?
that's an old type machine that when you type on it, it cuts a tape, and then you take the tape and you feed it into a little system, and it just types, but it types out the information that you have put in it. And when you see it, everybody sees it all over.
Okay.
And if you make any mistakes, you can't correct them because. So anyhow, I was amazed at that, and then I heard all of a sudden something said, Norfolk, this is Houston. I want to hold up your photo for a minute because I got a photo of Nixon that I got to send to New York, and then I'll come back to you, and you can send that photo of the sailor down to me. And Roger. And so, I'm saying, wow. I said, this is too much for me to learn. But anyhow, I told the managing editor, he told me, he said, I'll give you 4 days to learn this job. So if you learn this job in 4 days, it's your job. I said, yes, sir. Okay, I'll give it a shot. So the next day I started, and the wire room chief was a retired Navy chief. He was the wire room chief. And so Charlie was a good instructor. He told me everything about the wire room. And I had a little book, we call them wheel books, that you write down. I jotted all my notes down that he was telling me about. So I started jotting down notes and everything and taking down everything. And it was going pretty smoothly. From the second day I went, Charlie was giving me information and showing me stuff around the wire room. And the third day I went, there was no Charlie. Charlie Benway wasn't there. So I'm sitting in the wire room, and the managing editor came down and he said, Byrd, you're in here by yourself tonight. He said Charlie Benway had to go to New York. So his father died. He had to go on emergency, New York on emergency. I said, wow. And so anyhow, I guess the good Lord looked out for me that night, because didn't much happen until around 10 o'clock, 10:15, somewhere like that. We had satellite offices, and they send their stuff by fax, machine. And
So they had fax machines back then as well.
yeah, old style. They weren't like the ones we got nowadays, but they were old style.
Okay.
And you had to work with them to make them work right. So this Virginia Beach satellite office wanted to send me a copy of his article that we had an 11 o'clock deadline, and he had a hot story that he wanted to get into the plant before the 11 o'clock deadline, to meet the 11 o'clock deadline. Well, he started sending it, but we couldn't phase it. I couldn't phase it. And he sent it 3 or 4 times, and then he panicked.
What is phasing?
Phasing, making it come clear, the machine.
Okay.
Because if you don't phase it right, it'll be halfway the machine, half of the copy,
Okay.
So I had to phase it. And so the next thing I know, here comes the managing editor with a cadre of writers and stuff, and they were all, hey, what's going on? What's going on? They were excited about this. News people get a little excited about news. They get, so anyhow, when things ain't going right for especially when it's getting close to their deadline to get their copy in, they get more anxious. So anyhow, the managing editor said, well, Byrd, what's the problem? I said, I don't know, we can't get this thing phased. So he went over there and he punched a button underneath the phase machine, and the copy came just as clear as day. And he said, wow, I just looked at him and I said, you must have magic fingers. But anyhow, that night ended with no incidents, and then I went on to be one of the top wire room workers in the district. And our district included D.C. and North Carolina and Maryland. So I was getting a lot of accolades. But every night I would, what I call my lunch, about 8 o'clock I would eat my lunch. And it got so, there was this old man, he was the North Carolina editor, who would come down and he'd bring his sandwiches so to have lunch the same time I did. So I had a 9th grade grammar book on my desk, and he saw the grammar book. He said, you ever thought about writing? I said, no, sir, I never thought about writing. He said, I bet you make a good writer. I said, well, no, I never thought about it. And at that time, they had, Admiral Zumwalt had come in as the admiral over personnel, and he was making all kind of changes in the Navy, the uniforms, and all kind of changes. He was changing some of the regulations and stuff. And so he was really popular at the time. So he said, the writer said, why don't you write a story about Admiral Zumwalt? You in the Navy, you ought to know about what's going on. I said, well, I'll give it a try. So I did. I wrote an article, and when I brought it back to him, he said, oh, boy, this is good. He said, we're gonna publish this. He said he had to go on a couple of days leave, and he said, when I come back, vacation, they called it. He said, when I come back, we're going to publish this. I said, yes, sir.
So,
Yes,
just a question. So why is an editor from North Carolina
oh,
in Virginia?
well, North Carolina gets the Virginian Pilot also in North Carolina. And so he was the editor to write news that's happening in North Carolina that our North Carolinians would be interested in.
Okay.
So
okay.
they called him the North Carolina editor. So that was the
Okay.
reason for that. So anyhow, he when he got back off of vacation, the Los Angeles Times had written an article about Admiral Zumwalt and the new Navy, and that killed. That was a front page article that the Los Angeles Times had written, so that killed my article. That's the way it is in the newspaper business. If you write an article and another newspaper get an article out about the same thing before you get yours out, then it kills your article. So that killed my article. So he said, why you don't want to be a news writer? I said, well, I don't relish going on the police beat. He said, oh, he said, no, I didn't tell him. He said, yeah, I said, all new journeymen and new interns will have to go on the police beat for 6 months before they settle in the plant as writers. And I said, well, I don't relish going on the police beat, but I never told him why I didn't relish going on the police beat, but I just told him I didn't. So he accepted that.
So what was the reason you really didn't want to go?
Well, back in those days, well, I guess it's still going on, but
Sure.
back in those days, when you go on the police beat and they go in a black neighborhood, and it looked like it was just distasteful to watch them, how they treated black people that they were arresting. And I wasn't interested in writing no story about how the black person got arrested because and I probably would have had to slant it in favor of the police, and I didn't want to do that.
So it was a real police beat every single time.
Yeah, they
were
beat
really
you
going
up.
out to beat you. Police beat.
Yeah, they beat you up.
Understood.
But anyhow, about 3 weeks later, he came down and said, you like sports, don't you? I said, yes, sir. He said, how would you like to be a sports writer? I said, no, sir. He said, why not? I said, well, I like my job that I have, and I don't want to lose this job. He said, well, the plant has an upward mobility program that you can, if you are successful in the job that you are doing, said that you can try out for upward mobility, and if you're not successful, you can always come back to the job you have. I said, well, shoot, I ain't got nothing to lose. I said, yes, sir, I'll take that shot. So anyhow, he talked to the sports editor, and they set me up to half of the night I would work in the wire room, and another half I would work in the sports department. And, working around what they call the horseshoe, where the news come in, the copy boys come in and drop the news on the desk in your basket, and you take it and determine what's going into the local newspaper, what's going to UPI, what's going to AP. It was fun. I enjoyed that. And then after working there for about 6 months, they signed me to high school. It was football season. They signed me to take high school football games. And so I would go out and take a game, and I would call in the stats. We had 11 o'clock deadline, so I would call in the stats. And once I called in the stats, they had, I guess, a template kind of thing. The next morning when I read the paper, I had a byline by Byrd, sports correspondence. But the only thing I had done in that particular thing was called in the statistics, and I had an article. I didn't like that. I like to be responsible, for my own doing. So anyhow, I told them that I didn't like that. So why didn't they give me a weekend game? So they did. They gave me a weekend game and a high school game, and that started at 2 o'clock. So I had plenty of time that I could get that done. So I took my first high school game during the day, and wrote the story, and it went by flying colors. It was a nice story and didn't get much editing and stuff. And so the next week I wrote another story about a high school game, and it got red ink all over it. And boy, I was ready to quit then because I didn't like that. But the other sports writers say, hey man, that's the way it is. If you, the editor has their view on what they think the story should be, so you know, you just have to accept that. That's the way it is. You get my story and you write it in your personality. I said, oh, okay. So that's what I did. But then, after working for about 3 years in the newspaper, I had gotten transferred from anti-submarine warfare force, and that's one of the reasons I wanted to say that that incident with the anti-submarine warfare force led me to get a job with the newspaper, and that started structuring my career, started giving me knowledge and skills that I could use for the rest of my career. So anyhow, I got transferred to Fighter Squadron 74 at Oceana, and we deployed aboard the USS America and went to Vietnam, and I was the evening newscaster on closed circuit TV for 10 months, and then came back. And when I got back, I didn't, no longer wanted to work for the newspaper. I was living on the base, and in 1960, I think it was around 1976, I got a knock on my door on my quarters, and it was the commissioner for the Central Intercollegiate Athletic Association and the supervisor of officials. And I opened the door, and I was shocked because, the CIAA.
CIAA.
Yeah, and I was shocked because they come knocking on the door, and Danny Doss, I knew the supervisor of officials because we were stationed together and we played basketball together. And I guess he had told the commissioner that I worked for the newspaper and I might be a good guy for publicity for the CIAA. So they asked me if I would do publicity for the CIAA. And I said, well, no, I'm not interested. And they said, well, we really need some help in the publicity department. I said, well, how much you going to pay me? He said, we don't have any money. He said, we can't pay you very much. So the commissioner said, well, I'll pay you your expenses for traveling around to the various schools. We had 12 schools. And he said, and I'll give you $100 a month. I said, well,
$100 a month.
Yeah. and so I said, oh, okay. And I could only work on the weekends during those days and traveling to the schools for their weekend football games or basketball games or whatever it was that I was that they were having going. So I did that, and in 1978 I retired from the Navy, but the CIAA wanted me to work with them, but they didn't have a full-time position. This was a part-time position. I'm making $100 a month. That wasn't enough money to carry me, so I told them that I couldn't do it. They wanted me to wait till July, and they would get another position, and they would get a full-time position, but I couldn't wait. So after I retired from the Navy, I went and spent 3 years at Newport News Shipbuilding as the crew training coordinator. I spent 3 years over at Newport News, and then I applied and was accepted for civil service, and joined civil service as a employee development specialist, and spent 19 years in civil service, retiring as the human resource director for the Norfolk Naval Shipyard. And after I retired in 2007, after being told by families and friends that I've been telling them about growing up in the Jim Crow era and the kind of incidents that I had in the Jim Crow era, they said, you need to write a book. So I did. I wrote the Mississippi Byrd on the wall there, the book, and it has many of my adventures in it, and I encourage you to take my book. So you can see where that incident at Anti-Submarine Warfare Force led me to a successful career as a human resource director, and I look.
Successful altogether, Daddy. You just
Huh?
you're all of that. You're just successful.
Well, thank you.
Well rounded.
Yeah. So, anyhow, my next podcast, I hope to have an interview. I'm hoping that may work out, but I want to interview the athletic director from Norfolk State on the success of the mighty Spartans. That's Norfolk State is my alumni. I'm an alumni of Norfolk State, and I'm looking forward to that. If that interview happens, that would be great because they did well in the MEAC. They won the MEAC, and I look forward to having her to share her success with us. So until the third Thursday in next month, I would say goodbye and join me, please. Thank you. Looking forward to seeing you.
Is that it?